Wyoming Territory, June 1878. The river had already risen past the cottonwoods when Zadie Mercer stepped into it, her skirts dragging heavy with water, her jaw tight as the current pulled harder than she expected. She had not planned to cross alone, not truly. But plans had a way of falling apart the moment the world turned its back. And the world had turned its back the day her older brother died of fever and the ranch hands scattered like smoke. There was no one left to drive the wagon but her. No one left to take the 2 mules across the Graybend River. No one to help her reach her uncle's claim in Fort Laramie. Just her, a half-broken wagon, 2 tired mules, and the need to prove she could do this without begging for a man's charity. She tied the mules to a tree, hitched her skirts up, and waded in. The current took her before she made it halfway. A sharp cry left her lips as her boots slipped on a slick stone. Her arms flew out. Cold water hit her chest, then her chin, then her mouth. The world spun. She gasped, swallowed river water, kicked wildly, but the current dragged her like she was a rag doll. Her bonnet ripped off, her breath vanished, and then a hand, strong fingers caught her arm, yanked hard. Her shoulder wrenched, but she surfaced, coughing. Her body slammed against another. Arms hooked beneath hers. A voice shouted near her ear, rough and desperate. "I got you, hold on." She clung to the man like she had known him her whole life. He dragged her through the water, his footing sure, boots finding stones she could not. Her teeth chattered and she could not stop shaking. When they hit the bank, he hauled her out of the current, both of them collapsing in the mud. She coughed until her ribs hurt. Her lungs burned. Her hair clung in wet ropes around her face. The man knelt beside her, dripping wet, chest heaving. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She blinked up at him. His voice was low and steady, but his eyes were sharp with worry. He looked about 30, maybe older, with dark blonde hair soaked flat to his head and a scar down the edge of his jaw. He wore a worn trail shirt, soaked through, and a battered hat that had somehow stayed on. "No," she whispered hoarsely, "just stupid," he frowned. "You were alone," Zadie nodded. "The mules. I left them tied up. I did not think the current." She stopped when her throat caught again. He stood, offered a hand. "Come on. Let's get you dry before you freeze." She hesitated, then took it. His hand was warm despite the river. His grip was firm, careful. He helped her to her feet and guided her toward a small camp just beyond the trees. A black gelding stood tied to a low branch, chewing lazily. A bedroll and saddlebag lay near the fire pit. He had not been there long. "I was just passing through," he said, glancing sideways as they walked. "Saw you wade in and figured you weren't planning to drown today." She gave a short, breathless laugh. "Not today, no." He crouched by the fire pit, struck flint to steel, and within minutes had a flame going. He grabbed a dry blanket from his bedroll and handed it to her. "I am Zadie Mercer," she said, wrapping the blanket around herself. Her fingers were still trembling. He met her gaze. "Boone Russell." "Thank you, Boone," she said quietly. "You saved my life." Boone shrugged, but his eyes softened. "You were lucky I was close." That night, after the fire cracked long into the dark, Zadie sat with the blanket still around her shoulders and Boone sitting a few feet away, whittling a stick. She watched the firelight play across the planes of his face, strong jaw, wind-chapped cheeks, eyes that looked like they had seen too much to be surprised by anything. "You from around here?" she asked. He shook his head. "Drifted in from Montana. Been working cattle up there." "Heading south for the summer," Zadie nodded slowly. "I was trying to reach my uncle's ranch in Fort Laramie. My brother died 2 months ago. There's no one left back home. I thought I could manage it alone." Boone's knife paused mid-whittle. He looked at her for a long moment. "Some things aren't meant to be done alone." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe not, but I do not have much choice. "You do now," he said. She lifted her eyes. He was still looking at her, steady and sure. "I can take you the rest of the way," he said. "If you want." Zadie blinked, surprised. "You do not even know me," Boone shrugged. "You look like you do not let things beat you easy. I respect that." She smiled just a little. "You always rescue strangers out of rivers," he gave her a half grin. "Only the ones who try to cross alone." Zadie's smile widened. The warmth in her chest had nothing to do with the fire. They traveled together the next morning. Boone helped her fix the wagon axle and ready the mules. He rode ahead, clearing the trail. At night, they shared coffee and jerky by the fire, talking slow. Zadie learned he had no family left. His father had died in a mining collapse when Boone was 16. His ma passed 2 years later. Since then, he had been riding cattle trails and drifting between ranch jobs. She found herself watching him more than she meant to. The way he tipped his hat back when he was thinking. The quiet way he checked the mule's hooves each night without being asked. How he never once made her feel small, even when she made mistakes. And Boone watched her too. He never said much, but his eyes followed her when she moved. He listened when she spoke. He laughed when she accidentally burned the beans and then helped her cook them again. On the 5th day, as they came over a ridge and saw the spires of Fort Laramie in the distance, Zadie felt a strange ache in her chest. She should have been relieved. But all she felt was how close they were to parting. That night, as they made camp one last time under the stars, Boone sat beside her by the fire, quiet again. "You sure your uncle will take you in?" he asked. Zadie nodded. "He wrote, said he had space. Said I could help cook and keep the books." Boone looked into the fire. "That kind of life suit you?" "I do not know," she admitted, "but it is a life." Boone nodded once, then stood. She stood too. The fire flickered between them. "I do not want to say goodbye," Zadie said softly. Boone stepped over the firelight close enough to touch. "Then do not." She felt her breath catch. He reached up, brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "Come with me. I am not much, but I got steady hands, and I will always make room for you beside me." Tears welled in her eyes. "You pulled me out of that river." "I would do it again," he said. She leaned in. He caught her, wrapped his arms around her like she belonged there, and she did. She smiled against his chest. "I will come with you." The fire crackled. The stars wheeled overhead. And Zadie Mercer held tight to Boone Russell, the man who caught her just in time. The morning they reached Fort Laramie, the wind came down from the hills dry and sharp, shaking dust from the cottonwoods. Zadie rode the wagon seat alone, reins in hand, while Boone rode his gelding beside her, quiet as always, his gaze shifting across the land like he was memorizing the ridgeline. The fort sat low and square against the prairie, its adobe walls sun-beaten, the yard within bustling with soldiers, traders, and Lakota men on horseback. The bells of a freight wagon clanged in the distance. Smoke rose from the blacksmith's chimney. The town had grown since her uncle's last letter, but the feel of it hard, spread thin, stitched together with habit and need matched what she'd braced for. Boone stopped short of the gate. "I'll wait here," he said. "No sense crowding in." Zadie stepped down from the wagon. Her boots hit the dirt with a sound that felt heavier than it should have. "You'll be here when I come back out," he gave a short nod. "I'll be here." She didn't smile. Her heart beat too loud for it. Her uncle's quarters were behind the livery, 2 rooms joined by a plank porch. She found him stacking crates, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, gray running through his beard. When he looked up, his expression stiffened, then eased just enough to be polite. He offered her a place to sleep and a plate of stew. There were questions, but not much warmth. His wife had died the winter before. His hands were full with the dry goods store and keeping peace between the garrison and the wagoners. He didn't say she wasn't welcome, but he didn't say she was needed either. Late that afternoon, Zadie stepped back into the sun, her shawl tight around her shoulders. Boone waited under a cottonwood, one boot resting against the trunk, arms folded across his chest. His hat brim shaded his eyes. She walked toward him. He didn't move until she stopped in front of him. "Got your place?" he asked. "I do," she said. "He means well, but he's got his life settled." Boone studied her, then tipped his head slightly. "You don't want to stay." She looked past him, toward the open stretch of land beyond the fort where the grass rolled light gold under the wind. "I want a life that's mine, not just somewhere to sleep." Boone's jaw shifted. "I've been thinking on something." She looked at him, steady. "There's a spread east of Rawlins. A man I knew passed last spring left it to his sister, but she's married with land in Nebraska. She's been looking to sell. It's not big, but there's a cabin, good well, and pasture enough for a few head. I've got some saved. Could make an offer." Zadie listened, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm not asking you to come, cause I don't think you can make it on your own," he said. "I know you can. I'm asking cause I'd rather build something with you than without." She didn't answer right away. A freight wagon clattered past, the driver shouting to his oxen. A Lakota boy ran by, chasing a dog. The world moved around them, but for a moment, Zadie felt still. "I'm not a woman who keeps quiet when something's wrong," she said. "I won't sit in a cabin and wait for supper to come to the table." Boone's eyes didn't waver. "I'd never expect you to. I don't need someone to rescue me, I know." She looked up at him, her voice low. "But I'd like someone to ride beside me." Boone stepped forward, just enough that she could feel his warmth. "I'll ride as long as you'll have me." She reached for his hand. His fingers curled around hers without hesitation. They left Fort Laramie the next morning, the wagon lighter, the mules rested. Boone rode close, pointing out the places where antelope moved in the grass, where snowmelt pooled in hollows that would dry by July. Zadie jotted notes in a small ledger she'd kept from her family's ranch fencing ideas, seed prices, what trees grew near the cabin he'd described. They slept beneath the open sky, her blanket pulled beside his, the fire burning low between them. He didn't touch her, not yet, but his presence warmed more than the fire could. On the third night, rain rolled in from the west. Boone woke before it hit and helped her roll the canvas tighter over the wagon. She laughed when the wind snatched her bonnet, and he caught it mid-air. "You always this quick?" she asked. "I was slower once," he said. "Didn't like how that turned out." He handed her the bonnet and their fingers brushed. She didn't pull away, neither did he. By the time they reached the turnoff to the Rawlins Trail, the air had turned sweet with the scent of pine. Boone slowed his gelding and looked toward the hills. "We'll be there by end of week," he said. Zadie rested her chin on her hand, elbow braced on the wagon seat. "You think it'll feel like home?" Boone looked at her, something steady and quiet in his gaze. "If you're there, I don't see how it wouldn't." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her hand slid across the seat and rested on his boot where it sat against the wagon's side. He looked down at her hand, then back toward the horizon. Neither of them said anything else for a long while, and the silence between them was easy. Earned. The land beyond the Rawlins Trail sloped wide and open, a long stretch of sun-hardened grass and scattered basin pines that bent eastward from years of wind. Zadie sat behind the reins, her back straight, bonnet tied snug beneath her chin, her eyes fixed on the distant rise where Boone said the cabin lay. The mules moved slow but steady, hoofbeats muffled in the dry earth. Boone rode ahead, reins loose in one hand, his hat pulled low to keep the sun from his brow. They passed a dry creek bed, the stones bleached pale, and Boone pointed with a nod. "Used to run strong in spring," he said. "Last few years it's barely a trickle." We'll dig a catch trench come fall, just in case snow's light again." Zadie traced the line of the dried stream with her eyes. "You've thought about this more than I realized." "I've had time to think," he answered, glancing back over his shoulder. "Wasn't sure who I was building toward. Now I know." She didn't answer, but her hands eased on the reins. The cabin came into view just after noon the next day, tucked against a low hill, its roof pitched steep to shed snow. The logs were weathered but solid, the door hung square, and the small corral beside it held a single rust-colored mare with one white sock. Boone dismounted first, leading his gelding to the hitch post, and walked the perimeter before nodding once. "She's held up better than I expected." Zadie stepped down from the wagon, the soles of her boots kicking up soft dust. "Feels like it's been waiting for someone," she said, looking toward the front stoop, where a chipped tin pail lay overturned beside a worn boot scraper. Boone ran a hand along the porch rail. "I reckon it has." Inside, the air was dry and close, thick with the hush of long disuse. Dust lay over the plank floor, and a swallow's nest clung to the rafters above the hearth. Boone opened the single-shuttered window, letting in a shaft of gold light. Zadie crossed to the stove, knelt, and opened the firebox, still dry. Usable. She stood slowly, turning to face him. "I'll need time to clean it out. We'll want oil for the hinges, flour and meal, new linens. I'll ride to the station in the morning," Boone said. "It's a day's ride, maybe less." "I'll bring back what we need." Zadie nodded, then stepped to the doorframe. "I'll start with the floor. If I wait, I'll talk myself out of it." Boone watched her a moment longer than he needed to, then began unrolling the bedrolls, placing them near the hearth until a proper pallet could be made. That night they sat on the stoop, a pan of beans between them, the mare grazing lazily in the corral. The sky stretched violet and deep, stars just starting to break through. "You ever think about what it'd be like," Zadie asked, "if none of it had gone wrong?" "If your father hadn't died," Boone chewed slowly, swallowed. "Sometimes. But I was 15 when he passed. I didn't know much about what I wanted then. Just knew I didn't want to feel helpless again." She turned the tin plate in her hand. "I know that feeling." Boone looked sideways at her, his voice low. "You got a mind that doesn't give up easy, Zadie. That's a rare thing." She didn't look at him. "It's not strength if it's only built on fear." "No," Boone said, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "But it's strength if you keep going anyway." They sat like that a while longer, the wind brushing soft over the porch, the quiet between them not needing to be filled. Inside, she swept the floor, folded what linen she could salvage, and laid a blanket over the pallet. Boone offered to sleep outside, but she had only looked at him once and said, "You've walked beside me every mile." That was answer enough. They lay back to back that night, not touching, but not far. The wind whispered against the logs, and the mare whinnied once, settling. Boone's breath even before hers did. In the morning he left at first light, saddlebags packed, rifle sheathed beneath his leg. Zadie stood on the porch, arms folded, shawl wrapped tight. "Don't bring back too much," she said. "We haven't got room for anything that won't last." He gave one nod, then turned his horse downslope. By midday, she'd cleared the hearth and scrubbed the walls with vinegar water. She found a pie tin, dented but usable, and 2 spoons tucked behind the chimney stone. The light through the window shifted slowly, stretching longer. She peeled potatoes, boiled water, and set a pot to simmer. He returned just after sundown, the gelding lathered but the packs full. He carried a sack of cornmeal, a spool of thread, a box of tallow candles, and a tin of coffee. He also handed her a folded bolt of calico. "I figured you'd need something for the table," he said. She touched the fabric, blue with faded yellow flowers. Her voice caught for a moment. "Thank you." They sat at the table he rebuilt from salvaged planks, eating potato stew and hot cornbread. The wind had died entirely. The silence was a comfort now. Afterward, Boone stood behind her, watching as she pinned the calico over the windowsill. She turned to speak, but he was closer than she expected. "I've had a long trail behind me, Zadie, and I never knew where it was leading," he said. She reached for his hand. "Now you do," she said. He leaned in, slow and certain, and she met him in the middle. His kiss was unhurried, warm like sunlight on worn wood. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "You caught me when I didn't know I needed catching," she whispered. "I'll never let you go," he answered. That night they slept beneath one blanket, her head tucked beneath his chin, the quiet around them full of something new and sure. The cabin no longer felt like a place waiting. It felt like a beginning. The smokehouse door hung crooked on its hinge, and the roof had pulled loose along the north side where the winter gales had likely torn it. Zadie stood beneath the eaves with a rough, barked branch in her hand, scraping dried moss from between the beams. Her arms ached, but she worked slow and steady, her apron dusted with debris, the hem catching on the stones beneath her feet. Boone's footsteps came up behind her, unhurried, the way he always moved when he was thinking something through. "I found a man east of the ridge who's got 2 milk cows," he said. "Said he'd part with the younger one for a bit of fence work and a quarter sack of oats." She glanced over her shoulder. "You trust him?" Boone's eyes narrowed faintly. "Not yet, but I'll ride his fence line and see how he works." "You can tell a lot by how a man mends what's his." Zadie nodded and turned back to the wall. "If we get a cow, I'll need a proper salt press and something to keep the cream cool. That spring hole near the oaks might do." "I'll dig it deeper," he said. "Line it with flat rock if I can find enough." By late afternoon, the wind had changed. Not harsh, but carrying a dry heat that brought the scent of distant sage. Zadie hauled a bucket from the well and poured it into a barrel Boone had patched with pine tar. She dipped a ladle and drank, her throat dry from dust and grit. When she turned, Boone was kneeling beside a length of rawhide stretched between 2 stakes, oiling a pair of reins he'd worked from a torn bridle. "You ever think about where you'd be now if I hadn't tried to cross?" she asked. Boone didn't look up. "I'd be riding south, maybe to New Mexico Territory, looking for work that didn't mean much." She lowered herself to sit on the porch rail. "And if I'd waited a day or found a better crossing, then maybe you'd have made it. Or maybe you wouldn't have." He rubbed the oil into the leather with steady fingers. "But I'm glad you didn't." Zadie tilted her head. "You don't wonder if we made something from a mistake?" His hands paused. "No. I think we took something that should have broken us and made it into a place we could breathe." She didn't answer. The sun had begun to fall low, throwing long lines across the clearing. Boone stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "I've been thinking," he said. "Come winter, we'll need more than just the stove if it turns bad. There's an old root cellar behind the shed. Half caved in, but I can shore it with stone. Might not be pretty, but it'll keep us fed." Zadie stepped down from the rail, brushing sawdust from her skirts. "I'll start drying herbs once I've got them hung. And I'll trade with the Shoshone women if they're still passing through come harvest. They sometimes bring dried berries and bark for tea." Boone nodded, then looked toward the paddock. "The mare's bred, belly's just starting to show. Come spring, we'll have a foal." Zadie raised her brows, surprised. "You didn't say?" "I wasn't sure until this morning. Thought she was just heavy, but her gait's changed." She smiled, faint but real. "We'll need to clear space in the lean-to. We'll do it tomorrow." Dinner was slices of salt pork and boiled barley, eaten at the table Boone had leveled with a stone under one leg. Zadie lit the new tallow candle, setting it in a tin holder he'd hung from a nail in the rafter. The flame flickered against the cabin walls, casting soft shadows that made the room feel deeper than it was. Boone leaned back, his chair creaking faintly. "You ever think about what you'd want if nothing stood in your way?" Zadie met his gaze across the table. "I'd want exactly this. But I want it to last." "It can," he said, "if we keep building it right." She stood and cleared their plates, stacking them in the wash basin. When she turned, Boone hadn't moved. His eyes followed her, not in hunger but in certainty. "You've got a way about you," he said. "Like you've already seen the worst a life can give and still decided to stay standing." She folded the dishcloth slowly. "I have." Then, quieter, "But I never expected anyone would see that and want to stay." "I do." Outside, the wind had died entirely. No birds called, no trees creaked. The silence was not empty. It was full of promise. Zadie crossed to him, standing beside his chair. He rose, hands at his sides, not reaching yet. She looked at him, all the lines of his face softened by candlelight. "I'm not afraid of work," she said. "But I don't want to do this alone." "You won't," he said. "I'm not asking for easy. I wouldn't insult you with it." She stepped closer. He touched her, just below the jaw, his thumb brushing the skin there like it was something fragile. She leaned forward and kissed him, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that made the room tilt and the world outside fall quiet. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. His arms came around her, not to hold her still, but to let her know she never had to run. They lay together that night, skin against skin beneath the quilt she'd mended with her own hands. Boone's breath slowed beside her, one arm draped across her waist. She watched the ceiling until the candle burned low, and when she finally closed her eyes, it was with the knowledge that she had not found shelter, she had chosen it. And it had chosen her back. The first hard frost came in late October, edging the grass with silver before dawn. Zadie stepped outside with a shawl around her shoulders, her breath rising in pale clouds, and saw Boone already near the lean-to, his coat dusted with frost. He was hauling the last of the kindling she had split the day before, stacking it beneath the porch overhang where the snow wouldn't reach. "I'll check the trap line after breakfast," he said without looking up. "Saw sign near the ridge marten or maybe fox." Zadie rubbed her hands together. "We'll need the pelts if the winter holds long. You'll take the rifle," Boone gave a short nod. "And both snares. If I can get up into the stand of spruce before the sun lifts, I might set 3 more." She turned toward the cabin, then paused. "I'll sew another lining into your gloves tonight. You'll need them thicker." He met her eyes briefly. "Thank you." The air between them had changed in small ways since the night they'd finally shared the quilt. It wasn't louder, just deeper. They moved like two people who understood the same silence. Inside, she stirred a pot of cornmeal mush, added a pinch of dried apple, and set 2 clay bowls near the hearth. Boone came in just as the kettle began to hiss. "You ever trap before?" she asked, handing him a tin cup. "Some. My uncle taught me. He wasn't one for patience, so I learned fast." Zadie sat across from him, folding her hands. "My mother used to cure hides in the back of our barn, said you could tell a woman's worth by how steady her hands were with a skinning knife." Boone dipped his spoon, then looked at her. "You believe that?" "No," she said softly. "But I think she did." He didn't push further. He never did unless invited. That was something she'd come to rely on. By midday, Boone left on foot, rifle slung across his back, snares coiled at his belt. Zadie spent the hours mending a grain sack, then sweeping the loft clean of mouse droppings. She found a wasp nest tucked in the eaves, long since abandoned, and knocked it down with a broom handle, watching it crumble in her palm. The light slanted deeper by late afternoon, and Boone still hadn't returned. She didn't worry, not yet. But by dusk, she had lit the second candle and moved his coat closer to the stove, just in case it had taken longer than he planned. He came back just after dark, boots heavy with mud, a pair of rabbits hanging from his belt. He smelled of pine and cold wind, and there was a red line across his temple. Zadie met him at the door. "What happened?" "Slipped on a wet stone, caught myself, but it bit me some." He set the rifle down. "Rabbits were further out than I thought. Took most of the day." She reached up to touch the cut, but stopped short. "Sit, I'll clean it." He didn't argue. She brought warm water and a strip of linen, brushing the blood away with gentle fingers. "You didn't take the horse." Boone shook his head. "Didn't want the sound. Ground's too soft after last week's rain." She leaned back, satisfied the cut wasn't deep. "You'll bruise." "I've had worse." She stood and crossed to the stove. "I boiled carrots earlier." "We'll stew the meat tonight." Later, as the fire dimmed and the stew settled warm in their bellies, Boone leaned back in the rocking chair they'd salvaged from a trading station, his hand resting on Zadie's knee where she sat on the floor beside him, mending his gloves by candlelight. "I've been thinking about the spring," he said, voice low. "We'll need to build a second shelter for the foal, and maybe fence the south end if we want to keep the snowmelt from pooling come thaw." Zadie nodded without pausing her needle. "We'll plant potatoes along the rise." "That slope drains well." Boone's fingers moved slightly, tracing the edge of her knee. "You ever think about more than the land?" She looked up. "What do you mean, about a child, about raising more than just livestock?" Her hand stilled. She set the glove aside. "I have." Boone met her gaze. "I'd like to build more than fences with you, if that's something you want." Zadie didn't speak for a moment, not because she was unsure, but because she'd never been asked that way, direct, honest, without an ounce of fear in it. "I want that," she said. "Not because I need it, but because it would come from us." He leaned forward, kissed her once, slow and certain. "Then we'll build that too." The first snow fell 2 weeks later, soft and thin like flour sifted from the sky. Boone pulled the mare into the lean-to just before nightfall, and Zadie lit the lantern early, the glass fogging with the warmth inside. They played a hand of cards on the table, the corners of the deck worn soft. Boone won, but only by one. That night, curled against each other beneath the quilt, neither spoke of the past. There was no need. Everything they had was already here. The winter held long, but not cruel. The foal came in late March, legs too long, coat slick and red gold. Zadie named her Mercy. Boone said little, but built a new gate the next day and sanded it smooth by hand. They planted potatoes, then beans, then squash. Boone caught a coyote nosing at the hens and shot it clean. Zadie salted the hide and traded it for sugar and a bolt of muslin at the summer gathering in the valley. Their first year passed like that, quiet, joint-handed, steady. By the second spring, the cabin was no longer just shelter. It was theirs. One morning, Boone brought home a small cedar box carved with a starburst on the lid. Inside, it was a plain gold ring. Zadie stood near the stove, flour on her hands, eyes shining. Boone held it out, his voice lower than usual. "It's not much, but I'd like to give it to you if you'll wear it." She didn't hesitate. "Only if you wear one too." He nodded, pulled a simple band from his pocket, and she slid it onto his hand. They married beneath the cottonwoods where the bees hummed and the light fell in patterns across the grass. No preacher was needed. They'd said their vows in action long before words found them. Years passed. The cabin grew by one room. The garden stretched wider. Mercy bore 2 foals, both strong. Zadie gave birth to a daughter one spring morning, her name chosen during a quiet evening when Boone had carved a cradle beside the fire. They named her Clara. Boone built her a rocking horse from the same pine used in their table. Zadie sewed a quilt from scraps of Mercy's first harness. In time, Clara learned to walk between the rows of beans, her hands brushing the stalks. She rode the mare with Boone's steadying hand and helped Zadie press apples in the fall. And always at night, when the lanterns dimmed and the crickets sang, Boone would draw Zadie close, and she would rest her head against his chest, knowing she was exactly where she belonged. Their life was not grand, but it was theirs, and it was full.